I do want to share with our viewers here some video and some sound of now the late Charlie Kirk speaking to this crowd of students in Orem, Utah. And it wasn't just students, I should add. This event was open to anyone that wanted to come. And here's what he was saying just moments before that deadly shot rang out.
Transgender Americans have been mass shooters over the last 10 years?
Too many.
Okay, now 5 is a lot, right? I'm going to give you some credit. Do you know how many mass shooters there have been in America over the last 10 years?
Counting or not counting gang violence?
20 days. That's how long it's been since the world changed for millions of Americans. 20 days since a single moment on a college campus in Utah ripped open questions that still haven't been answered. 20 days since the official story was written, wrapped up, and presented to the public with a neat bow on top. But in those 20 days, something else happened. The internet became a courtroom. Social media turned into an investigation board. And millions of people decided they weren't buying what they were being sold. This isn't a story about what happened. Not really, because nobody knows for certain what happened. This is a story about what people believe happened, about the narratives we construct when trust collapses, about the moment when an official explanation stops being enough. September 10th, 2025, Utah Valley University. A sunny afternoon that would become the subject of countless theories, endless speculation, and a national crisis of confidence in our institutions. Sometimes a single gunshot echoes far beyond its immediate target. Sometimes it reverberates through the collective consciousness, shaking foundations we thought were solid. Sometimes it becomes not just an incident, but a symbol, a Rorschach test where everyone sees their deepest fears reflected back at them. This is that story. Let's focus on the incident. The event was supposed to be routine. Charlie Kirk, the 32-year-old political commentator and co-founder of Turning Point USA, was kicking off another campus tour. He'd done hundreds of these before. The same format, the same energy, the same confrontational style that had made him famous and infamous in equal measure. The tour was called the American Comeback Tour, a typically bold bit of branding that promised confrontation and controversy. Kirk thrived in that environment. He'd built his entire career on walking into hostile territory and emerging victorious, at least in the eyes of his supporters. University campuses, with their progressive leanings and activist student bodies, were his natural arena. Utah Valley University wasn't Berkeley or Columbia. It was a more conservative campus in a more conservative state. But Kirk's presence still drew protesters alongside supporters. The auditorium was packed. Security was present, but not overwhelming. Everything suggested a standard event in what had become a standard circuit. He was on stage, engaged in a heated exchange with a student. The topic was gun violence, ironically enough. The student was challenging Kirk's positions on regulations and reforms. Kirk was doing what he did best, turning the question around, reframing the debate, playing to his audience. Some in the crowd were cheering, others were jeering. This was Kirk's element, the controversy, the confrontation, the spotlight. Then at 12:23 p.m., everything stopped. A sound. Witnesses would later describe it differently. A crack, a pop, a bang. Some didn't even register it as a gunshot at first. In the moment of confusion, there was a split second where nobody understood what was happening. Then Kirk went down, collapsed. In an instant, the energy drained from the room, replaced by screaming and chaos. People dove for cover. Others rushed toward the stage. Security personnel surrounded Kirk's fallen form. The student he'd been debating stood frozen, unable to process what had just occurred. Someone was shouting to call emergency services. Others were pointing toward a building across the plaza, though most couldn't have known where the shot originated. He was rushed to a nearby medical facility. The convoy of vehicles, sirens blaring, raced through the streets of Orem. Medical personnel worked frantically, but 15 minutes later, It was over. He was pronounced deceased. A single projectile wound to the neck. Fatal, immediate, final. The news spread at the speed of social media. Within minutes, the incident was trending nationally. Within an hour, it was international news. Video from inside the auditorium began circulating, though platforms quickly moved to restrict the most graphic footage. News helicopters arrived at the campus. Reporters set up positions around the security perimeter. And within hours, the machinery of official response kicked into gear. Law enforcement held press conferences. FBI agents arrived to coordinate with local authorities. A suspect emerged, Tyler James Robinson, a 22-year-old local resident who reportedly contacted authorities himself, turning himself in at a police station roughly 40 miles from the campus. The weapon was identified as a bolt-action hunting rifle chambered in .3006, a common caliber for game hunting throughout the United States. The firing position was determined to be approximately 142 yards away, on the roof of the Ramsey Center, a building with clear line of sight to the outdoor stage area where Kirk had been speaking. Investigators found the spent casing. They found evidence of the firing position. They had the weapon, the suspect, and, increasingly, the motive. By the next morning, charges were filed. Aggravated homicide. Prosecutors announced they would seek the maximum penalty. The motive, they said, was political hatred. Robinson had allegedly left behind communications expressing extreme animosity toward Kirk and his political views, text messages to acquaintances, a note found in his apartment, digital footprints of someone who had descended into obsession and rage. The press conference was clear and confident. Special Agent Marcus Chin of the FBI stood beside Utah County Sheriff Sarah Martinez. They presented a timeline. They showed photographs of evidence, faces blurred and serial numbers redacted, but enough to convey thoroughness. They spoke about Robinson's history of mental health struggles, his isolation, his consumption of political content online that had radicalized him toward violence. Case closed, the authorities said. A lone individual, a terrible tragedy, justice would be served. The narrative was complete, neat, documented, supported by physical evidence and witness statements and the suspect's own alleged confession, but that's when the question started. Initial skepticism. The unraveling. In the age of instant information, 24 hours is an eternity. And in that first day after the incident, something remarkable happened. The official narrative, delivered with confidence and supported by physical evidence, began to fracture under the weight of public skepticism. It wasn't that people didn't believe Robinson pulled the trigger. The evidence for that seemed solid enough. It was everything else. The timing, the circumstances, the implications, the sheer convenience of it all. Charlie Kirk wasn't just another commentator. He was a polarizing figure who'd built an empire of influence. Turning Point USA had chapters on over 1,000 campuses. His podcast reached millions of listeners weekly. His social media following dwarfed that of many elected officials. His donor network included some of the wealthiest individuals in America. His political positions had real-world consequences on elections and policy debates. He'd been instrumental in shaping the political views of an entire generation of young conservatives. He'd influenced primary elections. He'd been courted by presidential candidates. He'd become, whether you loved him or hated him, one of the most significant voices in American political discourse. And now he was gone, silenced, removed from the board. For many, that simple fact was too significant to accept at face value. In a world where powerful people have powerful enemies, where geopolitics plays out in shadows, where billions of dollars hang in the balance of political movements, could the answer really be that simple? One angry person with a rifle? The internet said no, and the internet started digging. Within hours of the official press conference, forums and message boards lit up with alternative interpretations. Reddit threads stretched into thousands of comments. Twitter debates raged across political divides. Telegram channels devoted to alternative media theories proliferated. Discord servers became virtual war rooms where amateur investigators assembled timelines, cross-referenced public records, and built comprehensive theories. The first red flags, according to the skeptics, were in the details. How did Robinson, allegedly acting alone, gain access to the roof of the Ramsey Center? The building was supposed to be secured during major events. Where did he learn to make such a precise shot? A 142-yard shot isn't impossible for an amateur, but it's not trivial either, especially with the pressure of committing such an act. Why did he turn himself in so quickly? If he was truly committed enough to go through with the act, why not flee or resist? And then there was Robinson himself. Investigators described him as a loner with mental health issues, but when amateur researchers started pulling up his social media history, they found something different. Yes, he expressed political views. Yes, he seemed angry, but he also seemed relatively ordinary. He had friends, he had hobbies, he posted about video games and movies. The descent into radicalization that authorities described seemed incomplete in the digital record. The inconsistencies piled up, at least in the minds of those looking for them. Eyewitnesses gave slightly different accounts of the timeline. The audio from inside the auditorium, analyzed by self-proclaimed experts, allegedly suggested acoustic anomalies. The speed with which Robinson was charged seemed suspiciously fast, as if the narrative had been prepared in advance. None of these observations proved anything, but they created space for doubt, and in that space, alternative theories rushed in like water filling a vacuum.
That point, but
It's not a point, it's a moral truth, isn't
okay,
it?
yeah. It was also a moral truth that the war started because 1,300 Jews were killed and 200 were taken hostage. And when you declare war on Israel, expect a firestorm in reaction. Let me finish, I let you talk. Israel, at its holiest day of the calendar year besides Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, Samat Torah, the 50-year anniversary of the Six-Day War. On Shabbat, Hamas invaded Israel, deciding to go recklessly to music concerts, to homes, to kibbutzes, and taking 200 plus hostages. They knew what they were doing. In one of the most cloistered urban environments on the planet, 2 million people live in a place where it's impossible to wage war. Impossible. Where they wear civilian clothing, they violate every tenet of the Geneva Convention, and the IDF, when they do something right, they get no credit. When they do life-saving surgeries of a Gazan child, they get no credit. When they drop leaflets, they get no credit. But when they happen to bomb a place where they are operating their military from, which we now know from third-party verified sources, hundreds of Hamas military operations are in mosques, schools, and hospitals. I'm sorry, the country where they were living in relative peace on October 6th, that all of a sudden we had a war, and Hamas started the war. And I don't see people that were really upset about the 2 million Germans that were killed in World War II, civilians. A tragic truth of war is that civilians die. I don't like it, and you don't like it. And they brought it upon themselves. The only operation and entity to blame is the leadership of Hamas, not the Israeli government, for fighting this defensive war after they were invaded. There is a good guy, and there is a bad guy. I honestly...
Isn't that the morality of a child?
Well, hold on. It's interesting you say that, because a child who knows that Israel is the good guy, Hamas is bad, has a lot more wisdom than a student like yourself at Cambridge University.
Theory 1. The Eastern Shadow. The first major alternative explanation pointed toward international intrigue, specifically toward a foreign government with significant interests in American political discourse and a well-documented history of intelligence operations on foreign soil. The foundation of this theory rested on Kirk's public positions regarding an ongoing international conflict. For years, he had been a prominent voice advocating against American involvement in certain foreign disputes. Through his podcast, his campus tours, and his social media presence, he'd reached millions with a consistent message: America should not be sending billions of dollars in aid and military equipment to conflicts that didn't directly threaten American security. This stance, according to the theory's proponents, made him extraordinarily valuable to certain foreign actors. He was in effect doing their work for them, influencing American policy from within, reducing support for their adversaries, shifting public opinion in their favor. And he wasn't even on anyone's payroll. He genuinely believed what he was saying, which made him all the more credible. One anonymous analyst, quoted extensively in online forums, supposedly said he was the most effective asset they had, and they didn't have to pay him a single ruble. Whether that quote was real or fabricated, it captured the essence of the theory. Kirk had become inadvertently a strategic asset. But then something allegedly changed. According to unverified claims circulating through various channels, Kirk had been approached in the months before his death. The alleged meeting took place in Miami. In a private suite at an upscale hotel, a delegation of influential individuals, described variously as business leaders, political operatives, or intelligence community assets, attempted to shift his perspective. They supposedly showed him classified or restricted information about alleged atrocities in the conflict zone. They presented evidence, real or fabricated, designed to move him emotionally. But more importantly, they offered him something he couldn't get through his current trajectory: legitimacy. A path from culture warrior to statesman, from campus provocateur to serious foreign policy thinker. The pitch, according to leaked emails that have never been authenticated, went something like this: "You've built the largest youth movement in conservative politics." Now imagine this would be a disaster. Their best useful asset was about to become their biggest mainstream adversary. He wasn't just going to stop opposing the conflict. He was going to use his enormous platform to push for a more aggressive opposing stance. His credibility with young conservatives, the very thing that made him valuable, would now be weaponized against their interests. In the cold calculation of intelligence analysis, he had to be neutralized before that transformation occurred. As for the how, proponents of this theory say it's classic intelligence tradecraft. The operation had to be completely deniable. Using their own operatives was out of the question. Discovery would mean international catastrophe. Instead, they needed a domestic actor, someone who could plausibly have committed the act independently. That's where Robinson comes in, not as a random lone individual, but as a carefully selected and cultivated asset. Online investigators have crawled through Robinson's digital history with obsessive detail. They claim he spent time in obscure forums known for mixing far-left politics with geopolitical content that happened to align with certain foreign government positions. They point to posting patterns that allegedly suggest manipulation, questions posed by anonymous accounts that seem designed to provoke specific responses, encouragement that pushed him toward increasingly radical positions, validation of his anger that came from sources that vanished immediately after providing it. The theory suggests that intelligence operatives working through layers of online anonymity identified Robinson as a vulnerable target. They didn't create his anger that was already there. They didn't have to convince him Kirk was dangerous. He already believed it. They just had to nurture those existing feelings, amplify them, and guide them toward action. Then there's the money. Independent researchers claim to have traced cryptocurrency movements through various blockchain analysis tools. Approximately $250,000 in Monero, a privacy-focused cryptocurrency that's extraordinarily difficult to track, allegedly moved through a complex series of wallets in the weeks before the incident. The trail goes cold in the dark web, but the timing, they argue, is incredibly suspicious. Was this payment for support, for equipment, for expertise? The theory doesn't specify because it can't, but the existence of unexplained financial movements, real or imagined, feeds the narrative of a sophisticated operation. Even the choice of weapon fits into this interpretation. A bolt-action hunting rifle is entirely unremarkable in America. Millions of them exist. They're sold in sporting goods stores. They require no special permits in most states. It's exactly what you'd expect a lone domestic actor to use. But that's precisely the point, proponents argue. A Russian-made Dragunov sniper rifle would immediately raise questions. An AK pattern weapon would trigger assumptions. But a common American hunting rifle, it perfectly supports the lone individual narrative. It's the kind of weapon choice that suggests professional planning designed to create a specific impression. The counter-arguments are substantial and serious. First, there's the complete absence of verified evidence. The alleged Miami meeting has no confirmed participants, no verified documentation. Enormous chance, if such involvement were ever proven, perhaps severe economic and potentially military responses would follow. The political leadership responsible would face internal and external pressure that could threaten the stability of their government. Intelligence agencies, especially those of major powers, typically operate in gray zones, cyber attacks that can be denied, information operations that leave no fingerprints, support for proxy forces that maintain plausible deniability, direct action against a major political figure on American soil crosses every red line. It's the kind of operation that risks far more than it could possibly gain. More simply, the official evidence remains compelling. Robinson left behind documented expressions of his intentions, text messages to people he knew, expressing his hatred of Kirk and his ideology, a note found in his apartment that allegedly detailed his motivations. Digital history showing obsessive consumption of political content that fed his radicalization. To believe the international theory, you have to believe all of that was either manufactured by intelligence operatives or that Robinson was so perfectly manipulated that he never realized he was being used. He had to believe, genuinely and completely, that the decision was his own, that the thoughts were his own, that the action was his own choice. It's possible. Psychological manipulation is real. Intelligence agencies have sophisticated capabilities, but it requires assuming a level of control and precision that even the most capable organizations rarely achieve. Human beings are unpredictable. Operations go wrong. Variables emerge that can't be controlled. It's a compelling story. It fits certain worldviews about how power operates. It provides a villain who's already viewed with suspicion by large segments of the American public. It explains why someone so influential would be targeted. But is it true? Or is it a complicated answer to a simple, horrible question? Theory 2. The Middle Eastern Angle. While some looked east, others turned their attention to a different region entirely. This theory, even more controversial than the first, suggested involvement by intelligence services from a Middle Eastern ally, a nation with one of the world's most legendary and feared intelligence agencies. Here we must tread carefully. This theory has been criticized, and rightfully so, for potentially reinforcing harmful stereotypes and conspiracy theories with historical anti-Semitic undertones. The fact that a theory exists and circulates doesn't mean it's valid, and discussing it requires acknowledging the very real harm such narratives have caused throughout history. But in the interest of examining what people actually believe in the aftermath of this incident, we must address it while being clear about its problematic nature. The alleged motive in this theory becomes more complex and nuanced than the first. Kirk had long been associated with religious conservative movements that strongly supported this particular nation. He'd organized trips for students and donors. He'd spoken at numerous events celebrating the alliance. He'd framed support as a moral imperative, connecting it to religious values and historical obligations. Turning Point USA had made support for this ally a core part of its platform. Kirk had stood on stages and declared that standing with this nation was standing with freedom, democracy, and Judeo-Christian values. His organization had become a significant force in maintaining and strengthening the relationship between the two countries, especially among younger conservatives who might otherwise be less engaged with foreign policy issues. But Kirk had also become increasingly vocal about an America First approach to foreign policy. And therein lay the tension that, according to this theory, became fatal. According to speculation, Kirk had begun asking uncomfortable questions in his podcast episodes during the summer of 2025, not opposing the alliance exactly, but questioning its terms, wondering aloud whether the financial arrangements served American interests proportionally, suggesting that all foreign commitments, even to close allies, should be regularly reevaluated based on current conditions and mutual benefit. In one alleged episode, he'd posed questions like, "We send billions in aid every year. What exactly do we get in return? I'm not saying we shouldn't support our allies, but shouldn't every relationship be based on reciprocity? Shouldn't we ask what we're receiving for this investment?" To most observers, this sounded like standard fiscal conservatism, questioning government spending, demanding accountability, ensuring taxpayer dollars were used effectively. Nothing radical, nothing threatening, but to intelligence analysts reading between the lines, according to this theory, it represented something more dangerous, the beginning of a shift that could undermine decades of political consensus. Kirk's influence with young religious conservatives was enormous. These were people who'd been taught that supporting this particular ally was a non-negotiable part of their political identity, inseparable from their faith commitments. If Kirk began teaching them that they could maintain their religious faith while reconsidering their political support, that being a good person didn't require unconditional political allegiance to any foreign nation, it could trigger a broader realignment. The coalition that had sustained the relationship for generations could begin to fracture. The theory proposes that intelligence analysts identified this as a growing problem that needed to be addressed before it metastasized. Kirk wasn't an enemy. He wasn't calling for ending the alliance or opposing the nation, but he was becoming unreliable. He was starting to think independently about an issue where independence was dangerous. And in the calculation of national security interests, according to this dark theory, that was enough. He needed to be removed before his evolution continued, before he completed his transformation from supporter to questioner to potential opponent. The proposed method would be characteristic of sophisticated intelligence work, a false flag operation using an already existing domestic threat. The intelligence service wouldn't use their own operatives. They wouldn't leave any trace of foreign involvement. Instead, they would identify someone like Robinson, someone who already harbored the necessary hatred and instability, and simply provide the final push. With that being said, I'll continue next time on this path toward Charlie and the Middle East narrative. The purpose of this narrative has been to examine not just what people believe happened, but why they believe it, to explore the information environment that allows competing realities to flourish, and to understand what it means for society when we can no longer agree on basic facts about significant events. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks and take care.